So if you're somebody from my generation, I'm getting close to 30, you've probably associated Red Dawn with the 2012 version. And get the get out of here. Hey guys, what's going on? Jeff Porter from Cinema Reactor. Today we are talking about the 1984 film Red Dawn. We've got Patrick Swayze, Charlie Sheen, Harry Dean Stanton, Jennifer Grey, C. Thomas Howell, Leah Thompson, Powers Booth. I mean, the list goes on. This is a megastar cast. This is one of the best films of the 80s. I know we just went and did GoldenEye, and I said it was one of the best films of the 90s. Red Dawn absolutely might be one of the best films of the 80s, and we're going to jump into it. So right now, Red Dawn is free to watch on YouTube, so if you haven't seen it, if you don't have the DVD, if you don't have it anywhere else, you can watch it for free right now on YouTube. You do have to sit through a couple of ads, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. So Red Dawn is in kind of before World War III. A small town is taken over by Soviet forces. A group of the kids, led by Charlie Sheen and Patrick Swayze, make it out to the mountains where they live, survive, and do everything that they can to eventually fight back. Meanwhile, back in the town, everybody's being killed. Their parents are being killed. They're being put into these camps, these re-education camps, while they're out in the mountains hunting, surviving, and they eventually fight back. The opening of the film is absolutely terrifying. If you haven't seen this, it takes place in just a normal high school. They're in the middle of class, and all of a sudden they look outside and they just see paratroopers falling from the sky like rain. Their teacher goes out to investigate and immediately is shot for his trouble. And, you know, as soon as you start the film, it throws you right in. There's not really a whole lot of setup. There's not really a whole lot of plot points that they want to take you through. They immediately throw you right into it. And you kind of feel that anxious kind of feeling, probably, you know, the same as the kids did, just kind of anxious, confused, what's going on. And they immediately, Jed, played by Patrick Swayze, comes back. He picks up his brother, a bunch of his friends, and they head out for the mountains before stopping to get a bunch of supplies at one of the gas stations that's run by one of the parents. Once they're out in the mountains, Jed assumes this role of leader, and I think it's one of the best portrayals of leadership, especially among young people, really ever. There's these moments throughout the film where Jed kind of picks and decides, like, when to be that leader, when to say something, when to not. So immediately he kind of takes control of the situation. He kind of calms the kids down, tells them what they're going to do, how they're going to do it. But then throughout the film, there's a couple of points where he just kind of lets the kids resolve their issues themselves. And I think that's a really good part of leadership. And they zoom in on Patrick Swayze's face. And I don't know why it always gets me, but there's this moment where Charlie Sheen's character, Matt, and Leah Thompson are kind of having a back and forth. They cut to Patrick Swayze, and he's about to say something. He goes, and then he kind of sits back, and it cuts back, and it lets them kind of finish out their thing. I think that's a really important part that doesn't get talked about enough. It's a really cool moment where Jed is saying to himself, you know, like, I could squash this right now. I could say, you know, both of you guys cut that shit out. We're here. We need to survive. We need to work together. But it's a really good lesson for Matt and Leah Thompson's character to kind of work out their differences and deal with it themselves. Another one of the plot points that I really, really like that I don't think gets mentioned is C. Thomas Howell's character, Robert. Robert has never killed anything in his life. He's never killed a squirrel. They show him deer hunting. The Eckharts take him deer hunting. He gets his first deer. And there's this moment where they make him drink the blood of the deer that he just killed. And they say that now you're a real hunter. Something's going to be different about you. And the first couple of times that I've watched this film, I've watched this film probably a dozen times. The first couple of times I was like, that's kind of a cool, like, introduction. Like, yeah, now you're going to be different. You're going to be, you know, killing Russians, I guess. But there's this really interesting story arc that it's kind of in the background where Robert really becomes one of the most bloodthirsty, violent ones of the group. And so him drinking that deer blood is really symbolic of his rapid change from harmless little kid into just straight on killer. So we've got the three main. We've got Maddie, we've got Jed, and we've got Robert. But I think another part that's really great is Leah Thompson and Jennifer Grey's characters, who just become badasses. You know, we always hear, you know, there's not enough women heroes, there's not enough this, there's not enough that. And then, of course, everybody always points to Ripley, they point to Laura Croft, they point to all these people. I think Jennifer Grey and Leah Thompson in this film are a great example. I mean, just look at these pictures. They're complete badasses in the film. So while there are like really badass women in this film, this feels like a total like obviously like a total man film, right? But it's not your typical like shoot 'em up action explosions. It has all that, but I think there's a deeper story where it kind of explores kind of the emotional drain, and you see it throughout the film between Jed and Matt, right? They kind of put all the responsibility on themselves. They kind of take responsibility for everybody, and at the end, I mean, they end up, spoiler alert, at the end they end up dying together in this really sweet dramatic moment where Matt has been shot, and Jed carries his brother who's dying over to a park bench and they sit down together. And the ending of the film, where they just sit there and slowly pass, is such an emotional moment that you don't really expect in a film that's just, you know, action and explosions. But there's a couple different moments like that, especially between Matt and Jed, where they talk about, you know, how they're not going to come out of this alive. And there's even a scene where Jed is marking the names on the stone, and he puts Jed and Matt Eckhart on there before they've even been killed. So he knows that they're going in there to die. And it's a very strong emotional moment that kind of catches you off guard. But that's kind of how this whole film is. This whole film is kind of marketed all the time as like just a total violent gun fest. But really, there's several strong underlying emotional storylines that will really catch you off guard if you're not paying attention. Someone we haven't even talked about is Harry Dean Stanton. I mentioned his name earlier, but he has an incredible moment as well. We only see him in a couple of scenes. One where they're making the Americans dig graves for their fallen comrades, and another inside the re-education camp. The one inside the re-education camp is extremely emotional when he is talking to Matt and his sons, Matt and Jed, and he explains to them like why he was so hard on them, and he hopes that they understand now. And there's this really intense father and son moment where it gets very soft and quiet, and he tells them not to cry for them. After they leave, he kind of loses his emotions and he starts yelling, "Avenge me. Avenge me." And it's such a powerful moment, and Harry Dean Stanton absolutely kills it. I think he saw in the script, you know, he's like, I got this one monologue scene, I have to kill it. And he absolutely, you know, just completely owns that scene, and it's such an intense moment. So eventually, after living out in the mountains, hunting and fishing and doing everything they can to survive, they're put in a life or death situation where they must kill in order to stay alive. And this is where we see Robert really give into that bloodthirst and Jed become that leader. It's after this initial moment that they decide that, like, we can do this, like, we can be a change. And now you get a group of high schoolers going around taking out armored convoys. And this is kind of where the fun is, right? You know, for a couple of months there, all they do is they plan attacks, they take out Russian and Cuban soldiers, and it becomes kind of this Mel Gibson in The Patriot, kind of stealth combat, and that's where kind of the fun of the film is. And of course, the iconic spray painting Wolverines. It's their local football team, and after everything that they attack and stop, they spray paint Wolverines over it. So if you're somebody from my generation, I'm getting close to 30, you've probably associated Red Dawn with the 2012 version, and get out of here. And I implore you to go back and watch the 1984 original, because it is light years better. So there's a ton of trivia about this film that I think is really interesting. I just wanted to mention a few. Red Dawn made the Guinness Book of World Records for the most acts of violence committed in a film. It was 2.23 acts of violence per minute. So it does kind of go back to that action explosions film. But like I said, it's really interesting that it has all of that while at the same time maintaining several very emotional, strong storylines that kind of flow underneath the radar of all of this violence. Also in the film, there are absolutely no green screen effects, no chroma keying, no miniatures. All the explosions are real, they are full size, and they are actually happening right there, which is incredible. We talked about GoldenEye last week with practical effects. This really capitalizes on that. And in 1984, it's not like they had a lot of options. And then one last bit that I thought was really interesting is in the role of Jed, Emilio Estevez was originally cast, which would have been kind of interesting because he and Charlie Sheen are actually brothers. And so that would have added more to the dynamic of the Eckharts. However, you can't really beat Patrick Swayze. I think this is Patrick Swayze's best film. You can argue that Point Break is, you can argue Dirty Dancing, you could even argue Ghost with Me if you wanted. I think this is absolutely his best role. He absolutely steals the show. He portrays Jed in such a perfect way. And even though there's so many kids and he doesn't even really get a majority of the screen time, he still absolutely nails the role. And there was even a piece of trivia about him like staying in character, and he said that once he became Jed, that was it, he was Jed. So I already kind of briefly mentioned it, but I think my favorite part of this film is the ending, not only because we get that really emotional moment, but we don't really get like an explanation of what happened. We cut to kind of a voiceover scene where it talks about the Wolverines. It talks about each one of the characters who died. And it says, kind of back when World War III happened. But we don't really get that resolve. And so, but it's still interesting to see that obviously what they did had an effect because they're still talked about. And this is something I think the remake really messed up because the ending with Jed where they sit on that park bench adds so much more dynamic to their relationship and so much more dynamic to this emotional feeling. Whereas in the remake, Chris Hemsworth plays the lead role and he ends up just getting shot, and it's kind of this immediate, sudden impact. And I know they were kind of going for that shock value, but I don't think it really paid off in the same way. I think this film is going to outlast so many others that have come out in this last decade or two. There are films that just won't go away, and I hope and I think that this is one of them. With it being free on YouTube right now, I know there's a lot of people out there watching it for the first time. I kind of went through the comments and I was interacting with some people, and people were talking about how they were just watching this and they couldn't believe that they had never seen it before. So if it's been a while or you haven't seen it, it is free on YouTube right now, and I'd highly recommend that you go over and give it a watch. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. We will be back next week. I hope you guys have a great weekend.